students, welcome to BioWhisper with Manas. Today we will deal with the topic pollination. This is the third lecture of the series of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So let's start. What exactly is pollination? So pollination is the transfer, it is the transfer of pollen grains. It is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma. From anther to stigma of the same plant or different plant or plants, whatever it will. So what is pollination? It is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the same plant or different plants. Generally, they are generally there are two types of pollination. Generally, there are two types of pollination. What are they? Self-pollination and the second one is cross-pollination. In self-pollination, the plant is the same, but the flowers may be same or different. Here, the flowers as well as the plants both are different. Now, in cross-pollination, under the category cross-pollination, we find autogamy as well as geitonogamy. We find autogamy as well as geitonogamy. Autogamy means, let's consider this a plant. There is one flower. Inside that particular plant, we have the same flower with the same male and female parts. So here self-pollination takes place. So functionally as well as genetically, here we find self-pollination. What happens in geitonogamy? In geitonogamy, let's consider a plant. Here we have one flower, another flower. So the plant here is the same, but Flowers are different. Flowers are different. So functionally we find cross pollination here, but genetically, since the plant is the same, so it's known as self pollination. So autogamy is seen in wheat and maize. Example of autogamy. Examples: wheat and maize. Example of gytenogamy. The examples of gytenogamy: castor, maize, coconut, cucurbit. So castor, maize, coconut, cucurbit, etc. So types of pollination. There are generally two types of pollination: self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination, plant same, but the flowers may be the same or different ones. Cross-pollination, here the flowers as well as the plants both are different. In autogamy, what happens? Same flower, flower here is the same, and male female parts are inside the flower. So here we find self-pollination. There are two types of self-pollination: autogamy as well as gytenogamy. What happens in autogamy? Uh, we have seen here same flowers, same plant, but here the flowers are different. This one and this one, but the plant is the same. So functionally we see that there is a cross pollination over male parts going to the female ones, and that means the pollen going to the stigma of the female parts, pistil or carpel. So here we find cross pollination, but genetically since the plant is same, so here we have self pollination. Examples of autogamy: wheat, maize, and example of gytenogamy: castor, maize, coconut, cucurbit. Now let us turn our gaze towards cross pollination. Here the plants are different, the flowers are also different. Okay, the pollen lands on the stigma. Okay, so functionally and genetically it's cross pollination, and for that agents of pollination are needed, and the best example is papaya. Cross pollination in papaya. So let's move ahead. I hope you have understood the whole thing. Now there are some plants like viola, oxalis, commelina. Some plants like viola, oxalis, and commelina. What's special about them? The specialty about them is that they produce two types of flowers. What are those flowers? Clistogamous flowers and chasmogamous flowers. Clistogamous flowers and the other one is chasmogamous flowers. Okay, so these are clistogamous flowers are closed types of flowers. Where we find in the on the same flower male and female parts. So pollination takes place. Self pollination takes place. What happened in chasmogamous flowers? What happens in chasmogamous flowers? So these are open flowers. The um, sex organs of both male and female are exposed. Well exposed. As a result of that, what happens? Cross pollination may also take place. So there are certain types of flowers such as viola, oxalis and commelina. Here we find two types of flowers. They produce two types of flowers. What are those? These are known as clistogamous flowers, chasmogamous flowers. Clistogamous flowers are the closed type of flowers. So here everything is closed and here we find male plus female parts. But chasmogamous, yeah, here everything is exposed. It's open. So there are chances of cross pollination. Cross pollination. So that's the specialty of such kind of flowers. Now let us move towards the agents of pollination. Agents of pollution. Sorry, pollination. So there are certain agents who contribute in pollination. They may be abiotic or biotic. Abiotic means first of all there is pollination by wind, which is known as anemophily. Anemophily. Pollination by water, that is known as hydrophily. Then we have certain pollinations, entomophily, that is by insects, ornithophily, by birds. Then chiropterophily, chiroptero, chiropterophily, that is by birds, and there are certain uh, pollinators such as snails too. So let's discuss about them in detail. What is anemophily? It means pollination by wind. Pollination by wind. So anemophily. Here the pollen grains, that is pollination by wind. Here the pollen grains. They are light, non-sticky and winged. Light, non-sticky and winged. So they could be carried away. So they are carried away in large numbers. For this, the stamen must be well exposed. The stamen must be well exposed. And what should be the condition of stigma? Stigma should be large, feathery, large and feathery. So they can large and feathery, so can catch the pollen grains. So if anemophily, here the pollination takes place with the help of wind. The pollen grains must be light, non-sticky and winged, and they are carried in large numbers. For this, the stamen must be well exposed and the stigma must be large and feathery. So what's the example here? The example here is corn cap. Butta. Now let's move forward. The second one is hydrophily. What happens in hydrophily? 30 genera of monocots generally show such type of pollination. Pollination by water. So these are generally seen in bryophytes, algae and pteridophytes. It is seen in algae, bryophytes and in pteridophytes. So water pollination, pollination by water, it is known as hydrophily, and such type of pollination are seen in 30 species of monocots, and these are found in algae, bryophytes and pteridophytes. Here the pollen grains, the pollen grains are protected by mucilaginous sheath or covering, so they don't get destroyed. So here the pollen grains are covered by mucilaginous sheath, and these are found in freshwater plants, Vallisneria, Hydrilla, etc. Found in fresh water plants, Vallisneria, Hydrilla, etc. Now let's move. Let's see the special cases of Zostera. Now let's discuss the special case of seagrass, that is Zostera. Zostera, which is also known as sea grass. These produce pollen grains in large number, in large number, but they don't produce nectar. They don't produce nectar. So what is special about them? The female flowers, they remain submerged inside water. So how does the pollination take place? Here the male gametes or pollen are ribbon-like, and they are released inside water. Because of the shape of the ribbon, they land on stigma. Everything is submerged under water. So here the pollen grains are released inside the water. Because of their ribbon shape, they are able to move swiftly and they land on stigma. Everything is submerged inside the water. So there is a special case of Zostera seagrass. What is the specialty about that? Here pollen grains are produced in large number, but they don't produce nectar. Zostera doesn't produce nectar. Here the female flowers are submerged inside the water. The pollen grains are ribbon shaped, and the pollen grains are submerged inside the water. As a matter of fact, you can say the male gametes, pollen grains here are ribbon-like, and they reach the stigma, and pollination takes place. Now let us move towards another topic. Now, what happens in the case of Vallisneria? Vallisneria, not Vallisneria, it's Vallisneria. Neria. What happens in the case of Vallisneria? Here, what happens in the female flower? the water, and here is the female flower. So the female flower, they reaches they reach the surface of the water. They reach the surface of the water by long coiled stalks. So we have the long coiled stalks here, and they reach the surface of the water. Now, where are the male gametes here? There are the male gametes here. The male gametes are released onto the surface. These are also released onto the surface, and these are carried by the water currents. Carried by the water currents, and they reach that particular part, landing platform, the stigma, that's the style, that's so. So they reach the stigma. So what happens in evolution area? The female reaches at the top, reaches with stalks, with the help of long stalks, coiled stalks, and the pollen grains are released at the surface of the water. So they land on the stigma, and the result of that pollination takes place. So this was the special case of Polystera, and when we had Zostera. What is the difference between them? Zostera, everything is submerged inside the water. So pollination occurs inside the water. In Vallisneria, what happens? The female stalk goes on the surface. The female parts are seen visible on the surface, and the male ones are released as a result of the land on the stigma, and pollination takes place. So in case of insect pollination, what is required? Can you tell me? In case of entomophily, insect pollination, what happens? There are certain conditions for insect pollination. First of all, flowers must be rich in nectar, second, they must be large, colorful, and fragrant. They must be large, colorful, and fragrant. So in fragrance. So these things, nectar and the large, colorful, fragment flowers, they attract the insects. Insects sit on them, and what happens? The pollen grains gets stick on them. Then by they here they stick, pollen grains stick on them, and then they move from, suppose that this is the pollen grain male part. Then when they land on a stigma, what happens? When they sit on here, especially the bees, when they sit there, what happens? Pollination takes place. So the next examples are Yucca and Amorphophallus. Best examples are Yucca plant and Amorphophallus. These are the examples. Now let us move towards another topic. Now let us move towards another topic. So let's move towards another topic. There are certain mechanisms which are there are certain mechanisms devices. That's the topic. There are certain mechanisms practiced by the plants themselves to prevent self-pollination. Prevent self-pollination. These are known as outbreeding devices. So what are devices, outbreeding devices? These are mechanisms that are practiced by the plants themselves. By the plants themselves to prevent self-pollination. So what are those? Let's study them. At first, it's anther and stigma, different positions of anther and stigma. Suppose that here we find the anther and here we have the stigma. So the distance is so much that the pollen grains can't reach the stigma. So pollination will not take place. Different position of anther and stigma. Second, production of unisexual flowers. Production of unisexual flowers. So if they are only unisexual flowers, that means flowers are one sex, either male or female. What will happen? Then self-pollination will not take place. The third one is self-incompatibility. What happens under self-incompatibility? The plants themselves prevent pollen grains from fertilizing. The plants themselves prevent pollen grains from fertilizing. What happens? The female one, that is pistil or carpel. So self-incompatibility means here the pollen grains are inhibited by the plants to fertilize the female ones, and the result of germination doesn't take place. And if the germination doesn't take place, self-pollination or any type of pollination not take place. The fourth one, which is one of the most important ones, if the pollen grains are released at different time while the uh, receptivity, the stigma receives, yeah, the power to receive pollen grain is at different times. So what will happen then? If pollen grains are if pollen grains are released earlier, and at that time stigma is not receptive to receive the pollen grains. Pollination will not happen. Sometimes it so happens stigma is ready to receive the pollen grains, but the pollen grains have not been released at that time. So in such case, what happens? Pollination doesn't take place. So let's summarize the whole thing. So there are certain mechanisms practiced. There are certain mechanisms practiced by the plants themselves to prevent self-pollination. These devices or these mechanisms are known as outbreeding devices. What happens in outbreeding devices? If the anther and the stigma are at different positions, then pollination will not take place. One is very large, or one is very high, one is very low. So different positions, pollination can take place. Production of unisexual flowers. If there is only male or only female flower, then what will happen? Pollination can't take place. Self-incompatibility. Sometimes the plants themselves inhibit the pollen grains to fertilize. So what happens? Pollination doesn't take place. Sometimes the the release of pollen grains, the timing of release of pollen grains and the timing of receiving the pollen grains by stigma is quite different. If the pollen grains are released earlier and the female, that is stigma, is unable to receive that at that time, pollination can't happen. Sometimes the stigma is ready to receive the pollen grains, but the pollen grains, there is no sign of pollen grains. So what happens? Pollination doesn't take place. So these are the different things which we have studied about pollination. Now let's study about monoecious and dioecious plants. Monoecious, monoecious and dioecious plants. Monoecious means here, it means here monoecious means here just consider it married. Don't get confused. And D here means divorced. Okay. So married means, that means in the same plant we will have the male and female flowers. Married means both the male and the female ones are on the same plant, and the example is castor and midge. Dioecious means divorced here. That's a term to understand. Otherwise, you will get confused. Here means the male and female flowers are on different plants. And the example here is papaya. So monoecious means married. That means male and female are on the same plant. Example castor midge. And here dioecious plants means male and female flowers are on different plants. On the same plants, castor midge, that's monoecious. On different plants, papaya. So that's all for today. We will continue with this particular lecture in the third series of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So if you haven't subscribed my channel, do it now.